Good morning. Thank you for joining us here at Behind the Scenes at the Hanover Theatre. This is Lisa Conda, and I am very excited to be here in the studio with Jon Rosbrook. Jon is our production manager. He's been with us since before we opened. He was part of the opening team, and people love to hear what Jon says because they all think he has the glamour job back there backstage, keeping track of all of the acts, what's going on. Jon, this is your opportunity to set us all straight, in a nice way, of course. Welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
And you know what? Jon has also been really nice, and he has participated in some of our Access Hanover Lyceum Series events, talking about some of his stories. So why don't you tell our listeners just a little bit about you and what you did before you came to the Hanover Theatre?
Well, I've been working in production for about 40 years, and I started out as a sound engineer and then transitioned sort of into a production and tour manager. I tour managed rock bands on international tours for about 10 years and then left the road and began working for Don Law, who is the Boston area promoter of record for the last 30 or 40 years, primarily doing rock and roll. And worked for Don for 20 years and transitioned then into Live Nation Theatrical Division, where I was the tech director in Boston for the Opera House, Colonial, Wilbur, and Charles theaters, which were all operated by Clear Channel, which became Live Nation or Broadway across America. And then I left that job in about 6 years ago. And I happened to be traveling in Asia when I got a call from an email that I received while I was in Asia, asking if I was interested in coming to talk to the people who were putting together the new Hanover Theatre, which I was unaware of because I didn't know the name, of course. I had only worked in Worcester at the DCU Center for many, many years in terms of doing shows, so I wasn't familiar with the theater, but I came out when I got back from Indonesia and met with Troy Siebels and took a tour of the place that was about 2 months before opening, and they eventually talked me into taking the job. I didn't know if I wanted to commute to Worcester, which was my only reluctance at the beginning. But as it turns out, I come out here early in the morning when there's no traffic, and I go home late at night when there's also no traffic, so it turns out to be pretty painless. And the staff and the building and the way they were running it as a nonprofit was very appealing to me. So I did take them up on their offer, and I'm now just beginning my 6th year with the company.
I know we just celebrated 5 years of you, Jon, at one of the most recent staff meetings. And I have to tell our listeners that Jon is being a little humble because when he said rock and roll, he was on the Meatloaf tour.
Well, I was Meatloaf's tour manager in the original Bat Out of Hell, that's for sure, for a few years there. But I also tour managed Todd Rundgren and Ian Hunter and Mick Ronson, Ellen Foley, Metallica, Chris Christopherson. It goes on for a number of years. But I also, in the course of working with Don Law for 20, 25 years, have done production for virtually everyone in the business. I mean, 20 times with the Stones, more than that with Dylan, The Who, U2, Madonna, and everything short of that as well. So.
Right. So it's like a who's who of the music industry. But one of my favorite background tidbits about Jon is he's a classical pianist.
Well, yes. It's more of a was than is, but
well,
I was trained that
practice.
way. I was a music major, and my major was piano. And so I was schooled as a pianist since I was about 5. And I still play. I mean, I have a grand piano at home. I don't get as much time and don't put as much effort into it as I should, but you never forget how to play.
Absolutely, because let me tell you, my mother was studying to be a concert pianist herself, and so everybody in my family knows how to play. We have a baby grand in our house, and I have one today, and I know exactly what you mean as far as I will never forget the Gypsy Rondo, for example, and I will never forget how to play my scales with my fingers curved just so. And so it takes a lot of discipline, and I bring that up because Jon has to run a very tight ship back there, backstage, to keep everything in order. And here at the Hanover Theatre, we literally have something for everyone, from the community productions, like Assumption College is bringing in their spring production, to Diana Ross. What are some of the high points from your perspective of some of the acts that we've had and we have coming?
Well, I think it's fun being at the theater because the variety is wider than it was. Well, when I was working for Broadway Across America in Boston, it was similar to this, where there was a mix of comedy and music and dance and theater, Broadway tours, all of that, which we do all of that here at the Hanover. In addition, though, the Hanover, because of its mission as a nonprofit, puts a lot of effort into community type affairs, smaller productions, productions that normally wouldn't be able to afford to go into a house this size. And we scale things down and try to accommodate them and give them the ability to experience their productions in a big, glamorous setting like the Hanover, which they otherwise would not be able to afford in most cities.
Right. Totally. And I think that students especially really appreciate the opportunity to perform on the same stage as some of the major names, you know, from Bernadette Peters to some of the ballets that have been on our stage are world class. And, you know, we talk a lot about what does world class mean. And you have some thoughts on that. Do you want to share them?
Well, I think world class is a name that goes on productions that are first rate, that are well known, that tour a lot. For instance, in dance, when you can put Paul Taylor on stage and Alvin Ailey's dance companies on our stage and the Russian National Ballet, those are all top flight, very well known, recognizable groups. And so that certainly qualifies as world class. Diana Ross, Aretha Franklin, Bernadette Peters also are world class entertainers in their own genres. Miranda Lambert in country music was on our stage recently, and
we have
she's
Boz
become a big star. Boz Skaggs, who is very well known to rock fans of the 70s,
right,
probably more than maybe 80s, but he's still at it, and the quality will still be there. So.
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting, too, you know, you brought up some of the dance troupes and the dance companies that we've had from Paul Taylor. And so if you're not necessarily a dance enthusiast, you might not recognize that name, but they are one of the best dance companies out there for sure. And then you put that next to a more local production like Ballet Arts Worcester's production of The Nutcracker, where basically that is an example of a very professionally run production that combines local talent with some larger name dancers from the Festival Ballet in Providence. But the point is the cast members are getting the same experience backstage under your direction as some of the national ballerinas are, you know?
Oh, yeah, that's correct. I mean, we certainly treat everyone equally. So
Absolutely.
we don't lessen the production offerings for local or community or college-based productions. Sometimes the scenic elements are simpler and the sets may be simpler because they simply can't afford to build the types of things that a big touring production brings with them. But the sound and the lighting and the stage and the vision from the audience point of view will be the same. Mm-hmm. And so for the performers, it's certainly exciting for them because they generally rehearse in an area half the size of what they perform on our stage, and
Mm-hmm.
they find it liberating, sort of, and also a challenge because they have to step their game up a bit to fill a room that big with the same feeling that you could get out of maybe a high school auditorium. It takes a little more thrust and a little more putting yourself out there and effort to get across to 2,300 seats as opposed to 600 or 800 like a high school auditorium might have in it. So
right. And now there are some frequently asked questions that we all in our different departments deal with. And I suspect that some of the frequently asked questions that are geared towards you really come from so what's it really like? Can we go back and meet the artist? Oh, can you give this bouquet of flowers to the artist? Or can I come backstage and meet them? And really, this is a very professionally run production, you know, and a lot of times the artists want to be in their own zone, right?
Well, there's that. And also, for instance, sometimes people will show up wanting to interview an artist. You can't do that at the drop of a hat.
No.
That always has to be arranged well in advance through their management and or their agencies because of their schedule and because of maybe their health concerns or how exhausted they might be that day. And frankly, the size and reach of your publication, because if they say yes to everyone, they'd be doing interviews, especially a very popular artist. Let's just take as an example Lady Gaga,
right,
who is not playing in our theater. She plays only arenas, but the demand for her time for interviews is monumental. So in that case, her management, well in advance of arrival into a town, will determine who she's going to talk to and how much time she can afford to give to that.
Oh, I'm glad you're mentioning this, John, because that really touches on our department in marketing and PR pretty heavily. I remember for our grand opening, everybody was very eager for Bernadette Peters to be interviewed by everybody. And I remember Joyce Kulhawick. I was working really hard at pitching her to come and cover our grand opening because obviously she was on BZ TV at the time. And boy, what an opportunity for us. You pointed out you weren't familiar with the name of the theater. Nobody was because we were a brand new theater opening up. They weren't going to allow Joyce backstage. They were not going to allow an interview with her for our grand opening, in fact, at all. And we had to really beg to get that opportunity. And a lot of times it has to do with the actors or the singers or the performers coming in. They're not looking for the PR from our building or from this region. So it brings back what's the reach of the publication or the radio station or the TV station, and being very selective. And it really does need to go through some protocols, which also touches on a lot of what you deal with too, right?
Yeah, it does. And I mean, the consideration from the artist's point of view not only is how big is your publication, but how much do they need the publicity? I mean, if it's, let's just go to the extreme, if it's Frank Sinatra, certainly he doesn't need the publicity. Whatever he says for your venue is for your benefit, not for his. Conversely, there are artists who, coming through an area for the first time, might want to take all the press they can get because it's good for the future of their career. The difficulties come more often in the timing. People always want to do interviews right before a show. Artists don't like to talk before shows because talking is the worst thing that singers, in particular, can do for their voice. They're always cautioned by their vocal coaches, don't talk between shows, don't go out after shows and get talking loud in bars because that's what will ruin your voice, not singing. And so when somebody wants to do an interview right after a show, the artist's voice is, if you looked at their vocal cords at that point, they would look red because it's a muscle and they've just been working out, and now to sit and talk is damaging to them. On the other hand, if you say, well, then I'll do it before, well, they come in and they have a certain time frame where they've got to do a sound check, they've got to get dressed, they've got to prepare. Sometimes it's mental preparation, sometimes it's physical. And makeup and wigs and hair and all of the rest of that takes time. So to try to fit an interview in there that's why the last minute stuff never works out.
Right.
If they do their job properly and get to the management beforehand, they'll generally be accommodated more often, certainly, than showing up at the last minute. So
absolutely. Give people an idea what happens the day before or the day before a show. We have a lot of national tours that come through our building. How long does it take them to set up, say, I don't know. What was the most intense show we've had so far? Well,
the most intense was, just in terms of the size of the production, was Mary Poppins. Les Mis will be about the same. Mm-hmm. And I based that on the number of trucks, the amount of time it takes to get the equipment in, and the amount of crew it takes to do it. All shows are different, but my job starts weeks and weeks, sometimes months, before the show shows up. I advance with every show coming in, every detail of what's going on. They send us a writer that lists what they're looking for, and then we work it all out to fit our theater, because every day they have to make little adjustments to make the same thing, to make it look the same in a different house every day.
Right.
So there's a lot of details, and it's really the devil's in the details. If the details are done properly, then the day goes smoothly and the production runs well. If you don't advance the show properly, you're in for a world of trouble because you've got to work it out on the fly, and then a lot of things have to be compromised, and it ends up with arguments and disappointments, and that's what you don't want. My job is to make sure that it comes in out of the trucks and back into the trucks as smoothly as possible, trying to accomplish what the production is set out to do.
So, for example, Les Mis is a good show for us to talk about. About how many trucks do you think they'll be bringing in with them?
Probably 8.
Wow.
Tractor trailers.
And so when did they start moving into our building? They're going to be opening Tuesday night.
Right. They'll come in. There'll be 2 9-hour days. They take 18 hours to load the show in. So we'll work 9 hours on Monday the day before. We'll work 9 hours also setting up on Tuesday, the day before the first performance. After the final performance Sunday night, it'll take us until 6 o'clock in the morning Monday to get it all out. It takes about 10 hours to take it out and about 18 hours to install it.
Wow.
So that's a big show.
It is. And that touches on the lights. And so what happens with the lights and all of the other things that you're coordinating at the theater to get the theater ready for the trucks to unload?
Well, the show that size, the theater would be considered a four-wall. A four-wall, in theatrical terms, means that the building sits there empty and all of the production comes in and out for every show, meaning all the sound, all the lights, all the staging, all the sets, all the props. All of the Broadway shows that tour operate that way. They use very little of our house lighting and sound system.
So I'm glad you mentioned the sound, because sometimes, and this is so subjective, dear listeners, so subjective, sometimes people will talk about the sound thinking, oh, it's not quite right in their opinion. And as you point out, a lot of times we're not providing the sound for the shows that are at our theater.
For the bigger shows, including all of the Broadway shows, we never provide the sound.
Mm-hmm.
No theater does. When you go into the Boston Garden, you're not hearing the Boston Garden sound system. When you go into the Opera House in Boston, they don't even have a sound system. We have a basic sound system that works up to a certain level of production. When you get to be like, let's say, a real heavy rock band like Heart, or when you get to be a full-scale Broadway production like Les Mis, both of those will bring in their entire sound systems. They will install them, they will operate them. So if somebody isn't pleased with the mix they hear, let's say they couldn't understand the words, they can talk to us about it after the fact, but it wasn't our responsibility during the show. It's always the responsibility of the show and the engineers that are touring and that are in our house that particular day. They take responsibility for it. They take complete control over it. The only control that we sometimes enforce is volume. Mm-hmm. If volume gets out of hand so that it's annoying or abusing our patrons, we would go to the show and ask them to back off on the volume a little bit. Other than that, the equipment that you hear and the sound quality that you hear depends on the level of the production the show brings with them. So we do our best to only book top flight entertainment that is going to provide top flight sound and lighting systems, but at times we have to accept what comes through the door, and that's what the production thinks they can afford, or that's what they're willing to tour with. So that's the result we get. 9 times out of 10, we get first-class sound and lighting systems, so I don't think that's really an issue.
No, I think it's been great. But you also mentioned, okay, so how many trucks are coming in with Les Mis? You said 8? So where did those trucks go? I know people are like, ooh, truly behind the scenes, what happens to those 8 trucks?
Well, fortunately, we have great friends in the Worcester Business and Development Corporation who, of course, our theater is the center of a lot of the downtown redevelopment, and a lot of what they're planning for the future, what the city is planning for the future, surrounds the theater, including our parking lots. So in order to provide patron parking and accommodate the use of our lots during the day, we move the trucks about a mile away to a lot when they're empty that Worcester Business and Development Corporation has made available to us. And we've had to switch lots a couple of times. Every time they're successful in selling a building, we have to move to a new lot. But that's okay, because they always come to bat for us and help us out, so we really appreciate that.
They've been really great friends. Well, so are there any other myths or misperceptions you'd like people to know about, from the production manager?
Well, I think people think it's more glamorous backstage than it actually is. It's a lot of hard work. I have a big crew here from Local 96, from the local stagehands union, IATSE. They do all of our truck loading and stage work. They're very professional. And they work long, hard hours. Mm-hmm. We're in there 10 or 12 hours, sometimes starting at 5 or 6 in the morning for a big show, and they're the last ones done at 3 o'clock in the morning when it's over with. So although when the show goes, it's certainly fun to be backstage, and it's fun to meet and speak with the artists, which we more often than not do, but it's really a work situation. It's a job back there, and my crew is very professional, and the fun is tempered by the fact that they've been working for 16 hours by the time we open the doors. So it's,
absolutely. So one final question for you, because I know you're really busy. You need to get back to the show that's in the house right now. But who's been your favorite person that you've been able to work with so far?
In our theater or ever?
Well, you can give me both. But
I don't know. I mean, it's very hard to say. I mean, I get that question all the time. And the other question is, who's the worst person? Who's the most annoying? But most people are not annoying. I'll just put that to rest. Most artists are cooperative because they want the job done right. They don't. If we don't treat them right, they don't look good, and we'll treat them right if they're treating us right. We won't treat them poorly if they're not.
Of course not.
They know not to throw tantrums and fits that people suspect go on all the time, because they're working with people on their own level, professionals who are there to make them look good. I mean, it's been fun at the theater working with Aretha Franklin, certainly, and Steve Martin, who came in for a discussion one night with Joyce Cole-Haywick, which personally was tremendous fun. I really enjoy the silent film series we've been doing because it's very unusual in my career. I've never seen a silent film produced with a live theater organ like we have. So those shows are especially rare and a treat. But Troy keeps booking such a wide variety of acts that I can only imagine what's coming next, and I look forward to them all. So.
Me too, John, me too. Well, it's a pleasure working with you. Thanks for taking the time and talking with us. And hey, we will see you at the theater.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.